I'm really pleased to be introducing this session because I think in many ways it's actually the most important session of the weekend, because you can hear editors talking and schedulers talking and regulators talking, but the core of current affairs is the actual practice of journalism, the long-term committed practice, which is the type of journalism which Peter Taylor will be talking about. Just looking back over the sorts of debates that have happened in the last couple of days, it seems to me that sort of two positions have sort of loosely clarified themselves. One which says current affairs is changing, that's a good thing, it's much more sensitive to audience feelings, it's much more popular and populist. And another one which says that there's a lot of hard work which has to be done, which isn't necessarily audience appealing, which isn't necessarily audience grabbing, but which is actually at the core of the democratic project, of addressing the audience, the current affairs audience as citizens. And this is what Jeremy Isaacs was arguing in the first session. Now, it seems to me it's fine to say these things, but you have to know in practice what you're talking about, which is why it is extremely good that we have here Peter Taylor, whose practice reflects those values that Jeremy Isaacs was describing. His career effectively began in a chilly January in 1972, when the British Army fired on civil rights demonstrators in Derry in Northern Ireland in the event which began to be known as Bloody Sunday. And Peter flew out there rapidly for this week, reported on that, and he'll be talking about that more, and he'll be showing some of the work that he did. But effectively in the 30 years since then, he's followed events in Northern Ireland very, very closely, has observed not only the events that were happening, but with a proper sort of objectivity, has been able to present the perspective of all the different participants, whether they were activists or whether they were ordinary people caught up in that struggle. And it seems to me that's one of the strengths of this sort of body of work. And the other thing that he's been able to do, because it has been a long-running project, is to revisit the same event again and again in the light of new research and new interviews. And that is one of the things which, the sort of context in which he was working made possible. And he will be talking about both the obstacles that he faced and the things which made that sort of work possible. And I think that's one of the strengths of what's happening. Of course, it wasn't always particularly welcome to the government and to those in power. Several programmes were banned, and at one point it actually led to the whole series this week being taken off the air. And he'll tell you more about that. Of course, his work has covered the whole range of current affairs topics, but it has focused on these very difficult areas of the secret state, of terrorism, of intelligence, of digging under the surface of those things that they don't want us to know. Because of his work in 2002 around issues of security services, intelligence services, the Royal Television Society awarded him Journalist of the Year, and last year he was also awarded an OBE. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce Peter Taylor to do our masterclass this morning.
Patricia, thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very impressed and relieved to see that so many of you had the courage to get up and get out here at 9:30 on a Sunday morning, especially when the rugby is in. And I'm very grateful on behalf of myself and no doubt many of you that the button will be pressed at 10 o'clock to record so we can watch it in here during the lunch hour. I thought of actually putting on my alarm on my mobile so it went off at 10 just to make absolutely sure that the buzzer went, but I don't think it's necessary. About 25 years ago, when I was a much younger, longer-haired reporter on This Week, Jeremy Isaacs came into our Friday morning meeting. This Week went out at, I think it was then 8:30 on a Thursday night. And we were worried. One of the points I want to make is that current affairs has always been an endangered species. There's nothing new about the notion that current affairs is endangered. And we felt, we're talking about mid-70s, that we were endangered because our ratings, and we were going out in peak time on ITV1, our ratings were slipping from whatever it was, 8 million to 7 million. And there was real consternation, and we thought about, should we be changing our agenda, doing more popular things? And I remember I made a film about David Cassidy, Weekend at Wembley. I did a film on Larry Flint and Hustler. John Feely, my colleague, did a documentary on the Rolling Stones' very last tour ever in the world in 1974. So we were very conscious of the fact that the ratings were slipping. And Jeremy came in, I remember it vividly, and I mentioned this to him, talking to him after his presentation on the first evening of the conference, and he'd forgotten it, but he came in and he said, look, you guys, don't worry about the ratings. The ratings are my problem. Jeremy was controller of programs. He said, you should go out and do what you think is important, both domestically and internationally, and do it regardless of the number of people who watch. We want people to watch, but the important thing is that you are driven by your own convictions. The ratings are my problem. I've got Man About the House. I've got the Sweeney. And we all breathed a sigh of relief, and we carried on doing what we were doing. I'm not going to reminisce about a so-called golden age, although I believe in a sense it was a golden age in the 70s with World in Action, Panorama, Man Alive, and This Week. But I do believe that there were certain things that we did and certain lessons that we all learned and certain principles that I came to abide by that underpin current affairs today. We now do live in a different world, and we don't live in the past, and we shouldn't live in the past. And I like to think that I don't live in the past. The world, as we've heard over the past 2 days, is very different. That viewers have, whatever it is, 200, 300 channels at the press of a button. They don't have to watch current affairs. It's not mandatory, so we have to make programs that appeal to the audience. But that doesn't mean to say that we have to appeal to the lowest common denominator of the audience, and I don't believe we do. To survive, current affairs has to change, and it has changed, and it has changed in many ways for the better. But what I'm going to argue is that in this new range of current affairs, this different kind of current affairs, we mustn't lose sight of the basic principles that I think should underpin television current affairs. And those principles are exactly the same principles that underpin journalism, because current affairs is about journalism, and it's about tabloid journalism, and it's about broadsheet journalism. And the clips I'm going to show you, I hope, will illustrate some of the inalienable principles that should underpin our work. And I think they're threefold, really. The principles of fairness, integrity, and trust, the mechanisms of what we do, in other words, how we go about making these programs, how we go about researching them, how we go about establishing the facts, and how we go about finding whatever truth it may be that others in powerful positions may not wish us to reveal. And lastly, and this is very important, we practitioners have got to have the support of the departmental heads that we work for, and they've got to have the support of the company, be it the BBC or be it ITV, because without that structure we simply cannot do it. And some of the clips I'm going to show you will illustrate the extent to which that support is absolutely critical, and instances on which that support simply disappeared and the